Excellent. Well, welcome AJ to the second podcast for Psych. Super excited to have you here. I've been really excited to speak with you all week. I've been doing a little bit of research and reading a little bit about you and the successful company, or two companies actually, that you've been involved with over the last few decades. So yeah, welcome. Maybe if we can just start by introducing yourself and, tell us what you do and who you work for.
Delighted to be here, Tyson, to talk with you today and to share a little bit about my journey. My name is Ajay Agrawal. I'm the founder and CEO of SirionLabs, one of the market leaders in the CLM SaaS category. And prior to this, I was the founder of UnitedLex, which is one of the global leaders in alternative legal services. But I started my career as a black letter lawyer. I was trained in Cambridge and then in Columbia, and I worked on Wall Street for many years before becoming an entrepreneur in the early part of the last decade at UnitedLex.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of hearing the story about, the conversation you probably had in your head when you were like, I'm done with Wall Street and then I'm kind of going to start something on my own, because I think that would be really interesting. But first, before that, I'm really interested to know, and I'm sure everyone else is, what does a day in the life of AJ look like? I imagine it's incredibly varied and incredibly busy, but just give us a description of one day this week, what it's looked like and how interesting it is.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And in fact, I would say you're spot on with the variation circa 2019. The great benefit of COVID is that it's restored some level of predictability to my daily rhythm. In a way that I could actually give a meaningful answer to this question today. So I think for me, on 4 days of the week, I get up relatively early in the morning and go mountain biking with a group of friends to start my day, to get the blood flowing, to get the metabolism up and running.
Yeah.
And typically the first half of my day is reserved. I try not to do any calls the first half of the day. And actually that works out nicely, because for the last 2 years, I've been operating from India during COVID. When I was working from New York, this was not always easy to accomplish. But in these days, the first half of my day is typically spent thinking more on strategic issues. It's solo time. It's the ability to reflect on the bigger issues, at the company or at a more strategic level. And then by the early afternoon, Europe is waking up, and by early evening, America is waking up. So then, of course, it's client-facing and investor-facing and other kinds of conversations that come in.
And typically, roughly what time does your day end?
So it typically, on the 4 days that I'm cycling, I try to end by about a little after midnight. But on the average day, it can get up to 1 in the morning, 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah. No, I feel your pain. One thing I'm quite intrigued about you, which is a little bit different from other CEO and founders in your peers, essentially, is that you've chosen to stay in India instead of be based in the US, or do you tend to float between the two? And was that what prompted that decision? Because I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think from a personal perspective, Tyson, I did relocate to the US in 2017, and I was in New York for 2 years, and I would still be there were it not for COVID, which completely re-architected. And I think the reason I moved to the US is I wanted to be closer to our clients, to our partners. And it did make sense at the time. It hasn't made sense since this outbreak of COVID for reasons I think that we all understand. But I think the deeper point behind your question is we are able to also at SirionLabs do a lot of things that are typically thought of as only capable of being done in first world geographies. So a lot of the and which is why I've been able to operate so seamlessly in India for the past 2 years and before I moved to New York. And things like, for example, product design or UI UX or corporate strategy and early GTM leadership all came out of India. We were able to find the right skill sets and get the right leadership group in India in the early years. And that, I think, was relatively unusual. When you look at enterprise SaaS companies, even the ones that have a large number of their technology and customer success operation and headcount located in India, the thought leadership of the company tends to be typically in the West. And I think that's also been the case with us. Over the last several years, we've seen that east to west migration of some of these higher order thought processes. And that I think has coincided with my own move to the West.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm from Australia, so I mean, one of the things that we're always concerned about is in Australia is learning that, losing that skill set with people kind of heading overseas to Europe and America. But it's good to see that you're flying the flag back the other way. One thing you touched on was around, you're reserving the time in the mornings for think time. People think in different ways. Like for you, do you think by sitting down and scribbling on paper? Do you think by walking? Do you collaboratively think, or is it a mixture of all? How do you do your best thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, and by the way, in terms of the physicality of it, definitely all of the above. I do at least 30% of my conversations, one-on-one conversations, tend to be walk and talks. And I've learned to kind of apologize gently at the beginning of the call, saying, sorry, you're going to hear some neighborhood sounds, traffic, dogs, request you to put up with that, because it's very healthy for me. And by the way, if you want to put on your walking shoes and do the same, super open to that. So walk. I find that when I'm walking, my thoughts tend to flow a lot more naturally, particularly when I'm walking outside the house as opposed to a treadmill. So for me, that is a very, very thoughtful activity, walking. It's always been a reflective activity for me. But in terms of the actual thought process itself, I find that there are two things that are really core to that morning. One is looking behind at the key events that occurred either the day before or the week before, and how we either surmounted those situations, dealt with them, and what the learnings from those situations are. I find that my stress levels tend to go up if I typically do not get perspective on how we confronted a challenge in the immediate past. I think if I get the feeling that this was a tough situation, we dealt with it successfully, but I don't understand how we dealt with it, and if it recurs, it's going to kind of raise the same level of stress. That for me is a problem. So being able to reflect on a particular fact pattern and a strategy deployed to deal with it and to bring that into the operating arsenal, that's a very big part of the think time for me. And I think the largest part, and I think this is the bit that for me was the hardest lesson as a CEO, as a founder, is looking ahead and trying to separate the wheat from the chaff. What are the things that really matter among the long list of things that I'm supposed to be involved with? What are the things that are going to drive the deepest impact for the organization? And how can I connect the dots between them and shape it as a vision statement or even as a set of priorities for the people who work with me? I think too many of us are guilty early in our career as CEOs, as founders, of just jumping in, that manic energy that we bring, that willing acceptance. I used to call myself the janitor in chief. That willing acceptance of a task, no matter how menial, is the quality that ennobles founders, but it's also the quality that drags them down from what their truest and highest purpose is, which is to identify the vision and to point the way at what really, really matters. And it took me a very long time to understand that.
Yeah, no, like, yeah, well, fantastic insight. I attended a talk recently at a conference called Web Summit here in Portugal. It's like the biggest technology company, and the CEO of Booking.com was talking, and she was talking about, and they've had a fantastic journey, kind of maybe similar to yours, in that they started as 6 people in a tiny office in Holland, and now it's grown to what it is today. But she was talking about that vision, kind of, because I'm leading to about the vision and kind of your mission point here. And she calls it a true north. And she said, from the moment we founded Booking.com, and, we were that 6 people in the little office, kind of running around solving people's travels problems and making them memorable journeys. We've never changed the true north, no matter what. And she said that's kind of what has kept her strong during this whole time. I mean, what's your true north for Sirion, and has it changed over time, or do you think you've stayed the course and it is still your true north?
No, very similar to the journey that you've just described of the bookings.com founder. I think and I would even go so far as to elevate that to a true moral north. I think there's been a kind of that moral compass that aligns to our true north in of Sirion, and it always has been about reducing the friction between business counterparties. Of course, the largest medium through which we act upon that friction is contracting, right? But ultimately, it could be a whole layer of business transactions and artifacts that either originate from the contract or in some way are related to that contract. For us, it's interaction and the friction that occurs between them. What we found, I think, a decade ago, prior to even starting the company, this is when I was working in my first company, UnitedLex, is that 80% of the dialogue between buyers and suppliers after signing a contract tends to be about whose data is right. So in other words, in colloquial terms, they're talking about talking. Instead of talking to each other, they're trying to assert the primacy of their own data. And only 20% of the dialogue is that kind of elevated, refined dialogue where they've agreed on the facts. It's not about whose version of the facts is, but they're actually solving problems. So for me, that's what the world of friction looks like. And for us, that's always been a moral compass, a true north. Is how do you attack that 80%, or how do you alter that 80-20 ratio?
Yeah. No, that's an interesting point. Maybe changing tact a little bit. If you were to give a TED talk on something that is not in your normal area of expertise, what would be the TED talk you would give, and why?
Well, I mean, I have to say, I'm not sure that I'm qualified to give a TED talk. I think in many ways, I'm still learning so much every single day. So I'm not even sure I'm qualified to. I think TED Talks come best from people who have learned very, very profound lessons in their journey, who have understood the meanings of those lessons, and who are fundamentally great storytellers. And I'm not sure I'm either one of those three. So for me, whether I give a TED Talk on the topic of Sirion or anything else learned in life, I think it would be very presumptuous of me to assume I have something of that nature to share.
I think you would have a very good story to tell. Okay, so
what? It's one topic I think that fascinates me, Um, and it's kind of partially related to our main area of expertise and partially outside of it, is how Smithsian, classical Ricardian Smithsian economics of the late 19th century has bled into corporate behavior in the 20th century. This, for me, is really a very, very fascinating journey. I think when Adam Smith is writing, his dialogue is at the level of nation states, and he's talking about how nation states have a comparative advantage in doing one activity or the other, and that's what they should prioritize. They should focus on what they're good at rather than trying to do everything inside every country and being self-sufficient in every area. And I think it took the corporate world maybe 40, 50, 60 years to understand that the same lesson applies to corporations as well. I think in the corporate lexicon, we call it core competency. And how core competency influenced corporate behavior over the last 100 years, literally, let's say from the Spanish flu to COVID, 1922 to 2021, that for me is a fascinating journey. If I was to talk about anything, that would probably be the one thing.
Oh, mate, you've got me sold. Like I would definitely click view on that one. I mean, I read an interesting book similar to that called Prisoners of Geography, which was kind of talking about the geopolitical space and, you know, over the last 800 years, how the rise and fall of different empires, mainly sometimes down to the geography in terms of being able to get goods from one place to another. It's quite similar in terms of, you know, why didn't Asia continue on rising at the time of the Silk Road, etc., but then Panama Canal, etc. So I find that stuff very fascinating. And I know you're a music fan. You listen to, as I understand, Indian classical music, and potentially other types of music. What when you do sit down, like, how do you listen to music? Is it on vinyl? Is it CD? Is it, you know, are you an audiophile, and what types of music and artists are you listening to?
Yeah, I have to say, thank you for asking that question. Music is very, very dear to me. And yes, Indian classical music is my first love, but I'm also incredibly fond of Western classical music, of jazz. And these days, just out of sheer laziness, I tend to use the digital forms of music consumption. So not even CDs and not vinyl, because it's just so easy to use your devices, right? When you're walking, when you're running or cycling, to reach iPhone as the delivery medium. So that's the preferred medium of consumption for me. But yeah, music is very much a first love for me, and I think I find I'm able to listen to music when doing certain kinds of work. I'm also able to listen to music in between certain meetings. But I find that for the really important strategic things that I do, I can't really listen to music at the same time because it really does soak up some of that brain, that energy that you need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, fantastic. What about when you think of the word successful? Who's the first person that comes to mind and why?
For me, I know it sounds like a very conventional answer, but for me, it's Steve Jobs, for sure. And I say this for the exact reason that he articulated in that famous commencement speech. He is a self-realized person. He connected the dots. Life's journey is by necessity random. I look at my own. I started out as a journalist. I ended up doing a bachelor's in semiotics and linguistics. I was doing a PhD in history. From there, I became a lawyer. And from there, I became an entrepreneur. And I first became an entrepreneur in a services company and now a technology company. I mean, look at the number of turns my life has taken. It is completely random. I mean, if you don't understand me, if you don't know me, my journey is random. And I think all our journeys to that extent have an element of randomness in them. So to be able to connect those random destinations that we've all experienced in our life and to bring them together in a cohesive experience or utterance, that for Steve was his version 2 at Apple, that is a divine, it's a sublime moment. That for me, it's not even success, it's self-realization.
Yeah. I mean, I presume you're talking about the Stanford address where he talks about the 3 stories. Yeah. I mean, it's hard not to tear up on that and that. And for those who are watching this and haven't seen it, that was definitely a speech that changed my life for sure. So it's the Steve Jobs Stanford address. I think it's 2006 or something like that. But yeah, what an epic speech, and one of the things I admired about Steve Jobs is he was an amazing storyteller in the way, in everything he did typically was always told around stories in terms of presentations and things like that. So, and he was, I mean, speaking about vulnerability, he was pretty vulnerable on that day, I imagine. Yeah. Yeah, excellent. What about, let me see. Just a small, quick one, quick fire. So what's the best purchase you've made in the last 6 months and why?
I would have to say it's the hybrid bicycle that I've bought, because earlier I was riding a mountain bike, and mountain bikes are okay if the company that you're riding with is also kind of coasting along. But if you want to ride a bike with a slightly younger person who's kind of zipping a little faster, you need a faster bike. I mean, the thing to do, of course, would have been to buy a roadie, but a mountain bike has suddenly increased the distances I can cover. It's increased the age groups that I can traverse while riding with, and it's definitely changed my mornings.
Yeah, excellent. No, I'm a mountain biker too, but I can't go across to the dark side with the e-bikes. But we have some pretty big hills, which I think in Delhi they have the same as well around Noida and that kind of stuff. But I curse every time someone goes past me on an e-bike because it's all about jealousy. But I'm definitely.
Tyson, I'm not riding an e-bike. I'm riding a hybrid, which is a cross between a roadie and a mountain bike. It's still
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I've seen those. They're quite cool.
Tires.
The thin tires, but you can go off road on them. Yeah. Right. Yeah, like cyclocross almost. Yeah. Excellent. What about the moment when you made that move from becoming an entrepreneur? Can you describe the conversation that you had in your head where, on the day, like what were you saying to yourself that was like, right, I'm going to go do this, and the internal conversation that you had and anyone else in your family that maybe who were either excited or nervous about the decision at the time?
Yeah, for me, these are 2 separate moments in my life. One is when I started my first company, and that's the transition from working as a lawyer to being an entrepreneur. And then the second is I had a very successful exit from my first company. I was fortunate enough to have a very success, and at a relatively young age of 43. So for me, I really did have a fork in the road after that, whether to start the second company. So I'm happy to talk about either one. Tell me which one is of more interest to you.
I'm interested maybe in the first one because I think that's the bigger leap, right? In the very beginning, from the stable career to hunting for your lunch. So, what was the conversation you had?
I think, and this is a very personal response. I think this is also a DNA thing. I don't think that in my case, it was about finding an idea or a product or a service solution that so intrigued me that I felt I must pursue this to its logical conclusion. I think in my case, there was always a kind of a misfit, discomfort type of feeling working as a as a lawyer in a law firm. I always knew somewhere in my mind that I wasn't happy executing the legal strategy for somebody else's business vision. That one day I wanted to be the owner of the business vision and have somebody else execute on my strategy. That thought process was always there. And I think starting almost 4 years before founding UnitedLex, I was already taking a series of sabbaticals and trying out some micro experiments, which were in a sense failed experiments, but precursors to what happened at UnitedLex. And I think all I really needed to really go over the hump in a very committed way and just quit my job. But every time I would return to the safety of the law firm, right?
Yeah.
I think what I needed to get over that final hump was either a commitment from an external backer or the promise of capital. And the ironic thing is I got the commitment, capital commitment from a venture fund to start UnitedLex. And within 9 days of starting the company, they pulled out. So, so I quit my job. I quit my job as a partner in a law firm. I put my life savings at play. I was watching those life savings dwindle away within a 3-month period. And the venture capital fund, which had committed to us, had pulled out.
And what happened next?
We went through a moment of truth where we couldn't meet payroll in the 4th month of starting the company. And we had some other kind of disasters happen along the way. It was a small group. We were 27 people at the time, all of us in India with 2 folks in the US. One of my co-founders was based in the US. And my co-founder in the US stepped up. He gave the company an emergency loan of $500,000, which tided us through. And we, in late October, got an amazing contract with Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard had purchased Compaq in 2003. This is the Carly Fiorina days. And Compaq and Hewlett-Packard were very, very different cultures. Compaq was a brash, go-getting, customer acquisition-focused culture. Hewlett-Packard was very genteel, blue-chip, old world California culture. Yeah. So, and notwithstanding that, there was a huge, almost 1.2 million contracts that were residing in Compaq, sitting out of their Houston office that needed to be integrated as a starting point to merge the 2 companies and to drive that overall cultural integration process. So we were very fortunate to land them. And of course, once we got them, then the venture capital also returned to the table. But I think had Dan not stepped in at that time with a $500,000 loan, I don't know how the story would have turned out.
Yeah. I always love that, just to remember that every big success was close to being a failure. Like nearly always, right? Like, you have to go through those to kind of, it's almost like a hustle factor to know that, to persevere, but to also recognize that, that the success was very nearly a failure. And I think that's something good to kind of put out there to the audience that, not to give in and always just find a way to make it work. Maybe speaking of failures, like what is, if you're thinking about failures, like what would be one of your favorite failures or, spectacular failures and the lesson you learned and why?
Yeah, probably for me, there is one iconic failure over the last 20 years and the one that really taught me the most. And that was ironically also at one point my biggest success. It's amazing to me how in retrospect what came across as a success later turned out to be a battleground. It was February 2009. UnitedLex had just crossed, I think, maybe $5 or $6 million in revenue, and we were able to sell a $4 million contract to what was at that time called CSC and is now called DXC, one of the world's largest IT companies, for doing obligation management. CSC at that time was looking for a fairly vanilla support legal service to manage and maintain a repository, electronic repository of its 430 enterprise clients. And they were looking to migrate them from Lotus Notes into a unified electronic repository. UnitedLex's role in that was to provide a team of low to mid complexity, cheap legal resources or low cost legal resources to help maintain that repository on a go forward basis. And during conversations with them, it emerged that the deeper problem that the organization and their CEO, Mike Lowry, were trying to solve for was forging a connection between those contracts on the front end and the delivery processes on the back end. The phrase that was floating around at CSC at that time, coined by Mike himself, was contract education. And he was saying, look, we've got great salespeople who empathize with the customer, their unique operating history, understand what their problems are, and have sold a very custom deal to win that business. But on the back end, our delivery teams are trying to standardize and industrialize our delivery processes across all customers. And the specificity of our commitments to any individual customer gets obscured as a result. That is where we are falling down, missing our commitments. And I think that's when the lightning bolt hit, that what we should really be doing is not just contract management, but quote unquote obligation management. Lex-based is the product that emerged. In 2009, it was almost a $4 million, as I said, $4 million plus contract. It transformed the fortunes of the company, spurred our Series B financing and the explosive growth that flowed from it. And then over the next 2 years, there was an intense debate at the board level at UnitedLex whether we should invest more in Lex-base or we should invest more on the litigation side of the fence. It's a debate that I lost. I pushed for Lex-base, but ultimately, looking back, I have to realize, apart from CSC and maybe a few other clients, that product itself did not get the kind of traction at the time. I'm sure if the product had got a greater traction, the board might have taken a more positive view of investing more in that direction. And I think that is, talking about something that we touched on earlier, that is what I got a chance to reflect on after my exit from UnitedLex. So in May 2011, when I exited, and I was fortunate enough to be taken as an entrepreneur in residence at Stanford University, the time that I spent at Stanford allowed me to understand the two big mistakes that we had made in architecting Lex-base. The problem is correct. There are contracts and they do contain obligations. That's absolutely a correct problem. But it's a two-sided problem. It's a problem both for the supplier and for the buyer. And really, what you should be looking at is which side of the fence should I begin the journey on? There are only a few hundred mega suppliers, but there are tens of thousands of buyers. And the information asymmetry is all loaded in favor of the supplier after the deal gets signed, because the people belong to them, the systems belong to them, and the information sits inside them. And it's the buyer that's groping in the dark, dependent on the supplier. So we were simply targeting the wrong end of the landscape. Always ask yourself, even if you identify a problem, who is it that you should be selling to? Should you be selling, in this case, to the supplier or the buyer? And that, for me, was like a big hallelujah moment. And the second, I think, is, yes, there is contracts, and yes, there is obligations, and they do add up to a problem. But is the problem wide enough to really make an impact? Or do we need to also solve for service levels? Do we need to get all the way to the bottom line and start auditing the invoices? Do we also need to map the relationship, the issues, actions, and claims? So the width, or I think in software design, people used to call it the 5-minute rule. What are people doing before they use your software, and what are they doing after they use your software? And is your solution broad enough, or should it be a little bit broader? For me, those were the two big learnings that came out of the time that I spent at Stanford, and that go into the heart of the Sirion product, and it's how it's architected today. So for me, and I think there's a third and associated learning, and that is how much manual effort it was taking to read these contracts, with the low-cost legal personnel in places like India and Richmond and so on, and why some of that information extraction could not be automated through artificial intelligence. So I think these realizations really lie at the heart of the Sirion journey for me. And I'm so very grateful to life for offering me that failure.
Yeah, super interesting point. And I guess, I mean, I know AI is at the heart of at Sirion, and you're preaching to the converted in terms of everything that I see, in terms of a lot of your competitors essentially have spent a good deal of time and effort creating functionality at the creation part of a contract. But you know, you're 100% right. The in-life contract management part is where you probably truly add value to the wider business outside the legal team. And I completely understand that there's a whole lot of effort within legal to draft a contract, negotiate a contract, get it signed, etc. But you know, it's a classic case of most organizations at the moment. You know, contracts get signed and then the information goes to die in some repository somewhere. And so there's so much value left on the table. So you know, it's really great to see that essentially that's your true north. You know, in terms of those three components. Because I think the first component, the creation, is really becoming table stakes now, whereas the in life and driving the value and the obligations and the value that's left on the table is probably something that's going to set you apart. That's for sure. Okay, just switching up again a little bit. You know, second company, AJ, very successful now. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self coming in?
That's an easy one. Don't sweat the small stuff. Don't sweat the small stuff. Figure out what really matters. Focus on that. If you were to spend a few minutes ignoring a few of the smaller problems, but focusing on areas where your team should prioritize and spend their own energy, you would be so much more effective.
Yeah. Do you think you would have made the jump earlier in your career to be an entrepreneur, or you in hindsight you thought the timing was right?
I think for me, I mean, for everyone, it's a very personal decision, but for me, it absolutely was the right time. I think different people mature and in different ways, and I think for me to have the confidence that the different aspects of creating and running a company are all manageable challenges. It arrived in a particular way at a particular time. I think for the bulk of my working career prior to starting UnitedLex, I was a law firm creation, right? Working in small, yes, the law firms are very big. And if you get to the leadership level, you probably get exposure to how a large enterprise functions. But for most lawyers who are navigating their journey, they're operating in small teams of extremely high performance, extremely high knowledge density, right? Yeah. They have no idea of what the support. In fact, if you look at most lawyers, they're not very charitable towards the support services that keep them going, whether it's document generation or it's IT or any other kind of support that they receive. And I think for me, that experience of understanding how these support functions need to be set up, how they need to be sustained and respected, and how actually it's very doable was the enabling insight that enabled me. And I think the experience of the failures between 2002 and 2006, those little sabbaticals that I took that didn't really go anywhere, those kind of gave me the confidence that the support functions, the enabling aspects of setting up a company are actually very manageable. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. Yeah, no, excellent advice. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask two questions. So first of all, what does Sirion mean, and where does the name come from? And secondly, you know, what's coming up for Sirion, and what's on the horizon?
Yeah, so Sirion is a Tolkien reference from the Lord of the Rings. It refers to a body of water in Middle Earth that is dammed. The water has no place to go till the light from the Palantir frees up and creates a channel. And so Sirion in Tolkienese can mean either that body of water, or it can mean the flow of water. And for us, the freeing up of that dammed water is very similar to the flow of data. It's also very similar to the flow of data that's released once you shine the artificial intelligence on the contract. So it's very geeky, very Tolkien reference.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I'm ashamed as an Anzac and a big Peter Jackson fan. I don't know it already, but yeah. And what about the horizon?
I think for us, the key challenge, Tyson, in the next 3 years is extending the impact that artificial intelligence has brought to static objects in contracting, which are legacy executed contracts, to moving objects, which are dynamic negotiating contracts. I think the phrase that's getting bandied around, and there are lots of interesting little companies that have come up in the last 2 years to tackle this problem, is called autonomous contracting. Can we use the same types of artificial intelligence to automatically diagnose what third-party red lines contain, and to autonomously redline them without human assistance? It is the ultimate dream. That is a huge direction in which the CLM journey will gravitate. And then I think to the point that you made earlier, that's on the contract creation and the storage side of the fence. A really, really big part of it will be the value realization that flows after signature. So I think for us, that was where we began the company. We used a whole bunch of technologies along the way to drive the value realization journey, and that remains an area of huge R&D for us, because we know as today, 2/3 of CLM buyers are asking the question, help me find my contracts, store them in one central location in the repository. About 1/4 of them are saying, help me streamline and automate my contract approval processes. So between that 67 and 25, that's about 92% of the CLM marketplace worldwide, and only about 8 or 10% are the runners, the advanced segment, the mature segment of the CLM landscape, who are saying, look, I know the basics, I know where my contracts are, I know how to create them, help me to realize the value, to operationalize the commitments inside those contracts. And I think to your earlier point, Tyson, that 8 or 10% is definitely going to expand as more and more companies figure out how to meet their basic appetites of storage and searchability and retrievability. Inevitably, they will move into more advanced directions of autonomous contracting and value realization. And that is where the Sirion product is.
Yeah, no, really exciting space. I think as someone who has been on the front line of implementing CLM products for a number of years, one of the key things that brings to mind when you talk about that is obviously that requires some deep integration into kind of tools that are not, outside of legal, upstream, downstream. And I know everyone's working towards, open APIs and things like that. I mean, what do you think that is still the big challenge in terms of normalizing the data, the flows, and the integration? Because that's, to me, seems like still the clunkiest part of implementing these tools.
Absolutely, Tyson. Absolutely. You really hit a very important point. That's become a fault line, in a sense, between the two broad CLM clusters that you see in the market today, the mid-market cluster, who in a sense have failed to address that problem, or who are not focusing on these problems of integration and interoperability, and the enterprise cluster, which have no choice but to confront these problems because their clients are giant enterprises. And I think for those companies, the ones that are operating in the large enterprise segment and have large global scaled clients, talking to P2P, to CRM, to productivity tools like Microsoft Word or Outlook, unless you do that, unless you situate the CLM product deeply within the enterprise ecosystem, tech ecosystem, it's not going to get the adoption that will drive the value, intended value for the client. So this is table stakes. And I think this is already starting to become a battleground within even the enterprise segment, because some companies do it better and more seamlessly than others. And you're absolutely right. It's not just about designing APIs. It's about creating native experiences. I think the phrase that is very likely to be a dominant phrase in CLM in the enterprise segment in the next 3 years is going to be around the customer experience.
Yeah, no, I agree, especially as we try and drive bigger adoption. All right, so the final question I have for you, and I'm sad that it's ending, but I'd really love to know, if you were to pick a theme song, what would be your theme song and why?
For me, again, going back to classical music, which I love, probably if I had to pick a theme song, it would probably be from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy, and for me, which is written by Goethe. And for me, the reason I would pick that as my theme song is because it really encapsulates the end of a process where you confront something, you see the solution, you see the thesis, the antithesis, and at the end of the day, you're able. The ode to joy is that moment when you've understood what that journey was about, what that solution finally means. For me, if you look at my own journey in life, it has been from selling solutions at UnitedLex to selling products at Sirion. And if you think about it very carefully, a services company's basic posture to a client is, no matter what your problem, I've got a solution for it. Whereas a product company is the exact opposite. They say, we solve and we handle this particular problem and that alone, right? And they're very confident about saying, no, we don't do that problem. You should go and get this other kind of technology that handles that kind of problem. So this song for me, this Ode to Joy, that is the moment when you realize what you were specifically as an individual, taking that point that we made about comparative advantage and core competency. The joy in that song for me is understanding who you are and what your product should be.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Wonderful talk and great insights, and excellent.